Welcome everybody to Apricot 2021. I'm Mara and I will be your moderator for the next 60 minutes. Before we start with the panel discussion, we have to do a bit of housekeeping. Be mindful of the code of conduct. Please find it on the Apricot website, and there is also a link to it in our Zoom chat. If you have any question or comment for the panelists, please use Q&A button that you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have any question or comment for the panelists, please use Q&A button that you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Sorry, I repeated it twice. Please use Zoom chat for general comments or to report a technical problem. The session is being recorded and it will be available later on together with the slides on Apricot 2021 website. If you want to post about the event, please do not forget to add the hashtag as well, Apricot 2021. We are still accepting proposals for the lightning talks, so please do not hesitate to submit it over Apricot 2021 website. So in the next 60 minutes, we will have a panel discussion about diversity in tech, led by Sienna Perry from AppNIC. Sienna, please take it from here.
Bear with me, everyone. I'm just working on someone else's laptop. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Mara, do you want to keep talking while I just figure this out?
Sure, no worries. I want to thank Akamai for sponsoring our Diversity in Tech panel. Today, we have a lovely line of folks that are willing to share their time and their experience related to diversity. We have Matt, Vincent, Katsuyasu-san, Jocelyn, and Taxo, and of course, Sienna. We plan to wrap everything up in the next 50-ish minutes if everything goes well. And after that, we're going to accept the Q&As. As mentioned, the Q&As you can ask by pressing the button in the Zoom chat, or in case if there's no time to answer the questions, you can always send a mail to secretariat@apricot.net and we will forward it to the speakers. I don't know what else to say. As mentioned, we are still accepting the proposals for the lightning talks, and please don't feel free to propose anything. Don't be shy. We're accepting everybody, and this is a very good opportunity to, try and test your speech skill set as well. Sienna, how's your technical problem going on?
We're working on it, Mara. I really do apologize. I'm going to let Arth keep working on it, but I am going to start. Would you mind?
Okay.
By acknowledging the traditional owners of the place where I'm sitting today, which is Brisbane, and in fact, acknowledging the traditional owners of all the places we are and the elders past and present. As you mentioned, thank you so much for thanking Akamai. They've been a sponsor of this session now for about 5 years. I believe we also covered who's speaking today. And did we talk briefly about the format?
Not really. I just mentioned how maximum it will last.
Sure. Okay. So today we're going to hear from me briefly, once I get the slides up particularly. And then we've got a really great lineup of speakers. We're going to have a very informal panel discussion with a couple of big questions that we're posing here. And that will go for about 40 minutes. We then have a pretty generous allocation for Q&A. So we really do encourage everyone throughout the session to think about their questions or comments. And you can, as Mara has said, put them in the Q&A box. And we're really encouraging that kind of contribution. So I am going to just push on because I don't want to eat up time and the slides aren't really important. So you're stuck with my face, I'm sorry. Today we're talking about diversity and inclusion, and it is quite a hot topic with a lot of different perspectives, but I thought maybe let's just define it, because so diversity is really about the mixture of people in an organization, and as we know, that is really important. But then we have this thing of inclusion. That's slightly different. It's not just getting the mix of people in the organisation correct, but also improving the performance and well-being of individuals and the organisation itself. There are a number of different dimensions within inclusion, and they are that people within an organization feel respected, connected, contributing, and they have the ability to progress. I'm going to now very briefly pose a little bit of a thought teaser, and this is quite an old kind of thing that's been going around the traps for a while. But what I'd encourage you to do is think immediately of the very first thing that pops into your head. So imagine an awful scene. There's a car crash. A son and his father are in a car, and unfortunately the father dies at the scene. The young child is pulled out and taken in an ambulance to the crisis centre, and he is met at the ER by a whole range of different doctors and surgeons and that kind of thing. And immediately one of the surgeons looks down at the child and says, "I can't possibly operate on this boy, he's my son." Rhetorical question. What was the first thing that popped into your mind? For many people, and myself included when I first heard this, my general assumption was in fact that the surgeon must be a man. So how could that work that the father had died at the scene? The most reasonable answer is in fact that the surgeon is a woman, and a more contemporary take on it, in fact, is that the surgeon may be a man, but in a male partnership with the father. The reason I tell this story is to try and highlight this idea of unconscious bias, because it's something that we all deal with, and it's really intrinsically linked to our organizations and our world's ability to celebrate diversity and really have an inclusive atmosphere. When we have unconscious bias, it colors, excuse the pun, and impedes our ability to see the skills and the people rather than just their facade, particularly their race, their nationality, their cultural background, their religious background, their gender. There's a whole range of age, there's a whole range of different dimensions. So just to, again, delve a little bit deeper into unconscious bias, there's two different types of bias. There's conscious bias, which a lot of us are familiar with. That's generally explicit bias. It's when you are very prejudiced against someone or something. But then the unconscious one is really about the social stereotypes that we hold very deeply and sometimes unconsciously. Two interesting things I learned about unconscious bias. The first is it comes out most prevalently when you're stressed or under pressure. Now, hands up who has been stressed or under pressure in a work situation. I think we all have at some point. So that's just something to be really mindful of. The second is that unconscious bias usually is about things that we're really not proud of. We're not proud of, we usually think that our values and the way that we are inhabiting the world, that we don't have these things. So it's very difficult to be self-reflexive and understand and face your own objective bias. You know, you think, I'm a really woke kind of person. I've got all different types of friends. But then you catch yourself and you're making an assumption about someone that's actually quite stereotypical and damaging and limiting them as well as limiting you. I don't think my slides are coming up, so I'm just going to keep going, guys. Why does it matter that there's this thing called unconscious bias in our workplaces? Well, I'm going to give you two different reasons why. One is very logical. It's all about money. And the second one is actually kind of scarier. So the cost of workplace bias is projected at 64 billion US dollars. Oh, look, I've got slides. Happy days. Hold on, go. Oh, it's being remote controlled. That's lovely. So if we can go, thanks to Akma. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Sorry, guys. You know, I think this is super ironic that we're talking about women in tech and I'm having technical issues. We're on slide 8. Thank you, slide driver. So in 2019, only 48% of men and women, only 48% of people say men and women are treated the same in their organisation, and 43% of people believe that they are judged by their race. That's a Campaign Asia Pacific study. Here in Australia, we have a thing called the bamboo ceiling. This is evidenced by the fact that Asian Australians comprise 12% of our total Australian population, but they only take up about 3% of the senior leadership positions in public institution and listed companies. There's a really great quote that I'm going to read you from Nancy Lee at Google. She says, "Only if people who use technology also create it can we get the kind of innovation we will need to solve problems." Thank you. Wonderful. We're on the same page. She's the Vice President of People Operations, and I think it's a very good point. And finally, speaking of Google, in 2015, Google spent $150 million on diversity initiatives, including bias training. That's a lot of money. Next slide, please. So I did tell you that, there's the financial side, but then I'd also like to share with you this really great article I found. My seat's going down. There was a really interesting study done that showed that so much of product and industrial design was based on this assumption that every user was an average Western male. What that looked like apparently was, I think, 170 centimeters tall and 70 kilograms. And so they used it when developing crash test dummies, personal protective devices, toilets in public places, pianos, smartphones, voice recognition software, and then also a major health platform's comprehensive health tracker. When it comes to crash test dummies, they have shown that because they were developed in this model of the average Western male, pregnant women and people who don't fit that stereotype die at much higher rates because they just haven't been designed for. Again, personal protective equipment. Not long ago, there was a terrible story that in the UK, a female police officer, was wearing a body shield that she had complained about, her and her colleagues had complained about many times because it didn't fit properly. And she was fatally stabbed, again, because the design, the product design was based on a unconscious bias. We talked about pianos. Every woman knows about toilet cues. And I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but when you're talking on a voice recognition software, I often don't get my voice picked up properly, but my husband might. And then we have this kind of hilarious, but also awful example of this comprehensive health tracker that was all bells and whistles, and it included heart rate, calories, steps, a whole range of different indicators. But the one thing it neglected was the thing that about 50% of the world's population experience, which is periods. So you'd think that a major health tracker would include that kind of thing. I'd encourage you to think of any other examples of when you're designing things or of design that's based on this assumption that there is one way for people to look, or one set of dimensions that a person has. The link at the bottom is this really great article, so I really would encourage you to have a read. It's very entertaining. Next slide, please. So before I hand over to our wonderful panel and get to the real meat here, I would like to make a little plug for an APNIC website. We have just recently aggregated a lot of the different community demographic statistics we collect across a range of different products and services and events. And the URL is there, and I'd really encourage you to go and have a look. Obviously, the dimension is not just gender. We do age and English proficiency as well. And it just gives this really interesting snapshot, imperfect, but a snapshot, a monitoring of some of the community demographic dimensions that we at APNIC and particularly the EC want to acknowledge and look at if we have room for improvements. So please do check that out, and you can provide feedback. There's an email at the bottom. We'd love to hear from you if you have any ideas or critiques. Now, next slide, please. Now we get to the good stuff. So I'd like to get our panelists all ready and raring. And we're going to start with a pretty easy one. What is your view on diversity and inclusion? Now, I'm going to throw to Matt from Facebook to give us a little bit of a taste of his experience of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, I think you alluded to the whole product design angle already. I mean, if you have a product that is used by a global population, if the people building the product are not representative of that global population, your product will never be able to address their needs, right? Like you will miss out on aspects there in all kinds of ways. Like you need to have a representative kind of development team if you want to develop a product, but it goes way beyond that, right? This is not just about products. This is essentially about problem solving, right? If your entire organization is made up of people that have a similar background, a similar education, they all went to the same schools, they'll come up with the same kind of ideas and concepts. You need to have diverse views. You need to have input from different angles, from a completely different mindset, background, thinking, if you want to be truly innovative. And I think this goes to the bottom of everything we do. The more diverse a set of people we have, the more creative, more innovative, better at solving problems we will be. And I guess that's the big cost numbers you were alluding to at the end, like at the beginning, where it's kind of like, yeah, the more angles you look at the problem with, the better a solution you will come up with, and the more successful you're going to be. So this really goes to the bottom of any kind of organization.
Matt, I totally agree. I think that's a really good point, that there's a cost to not having diversity and inclusion, but there's also a benefit to including it. There's probably a financial and making better products and services. I'm going to ask Tugso now. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about your view on diversity and inclusion, Tugso? Sorry, Tugso, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, I agree with Matt. Diversity at workplace gives access to talents and experiences that belong to different groups of people with various backgrounds. And then maintaining or keeping inclusive environment is crucial for keeping these high potentials in the organization or in the industry. And I think ICT jobs offer more favorable working conditions to both women and men. And working hours usually can be flexible, and the employees tend to have more autonomy over their time management. However, we still see high gender disparity in tech. And there can be many reasons, such as lack of interest in tech, that might be largely influenced by traditional stereotypes, etc. And for some of those reasons, we can improve the situation by understanding the differences, by understanding and acknowledging the differences and challenges of those minority groups. And from my observation, the percentage of women pursuing a technical role compared to the number of female ICT graduates looks mismatching, different. And I think finding a job after graduation likely to be harder for female graduates compared to their male classmates. Actually, companies tend to offer administrative roles to women. And this is a long time ago, but to share my experience after university graduation, I struggled finding a job with software engineering role. And after 3-4 months, I gave up and I started working in a university computer lab as an administrator. But luckily, it turned out to be a great start for me. And I enjoyed crawling on the computer lab desks, trying to fix or set up LAN networks. And it was cool for me to try soldering or replacing parts of computer accessories or sometimes magnetic hard disks. So within a short time, I learned many things and grew in skills and confidence. And I think that was thanks to the inclusive work environment at my workplace. My seniors and colleagues were very supportive and gave me challenges and opportunities that broadened my knowledge and also broadened my view of the industry. So to add here, I always encourage newcomers to the industry or my colleagues to be open to new environment, new challenges. Thank you, Sina.
Tugso, thank you so much for sharing that great story with us. And I think, it really underlines that idea that there's strength in difference. Now we're going to go to Yama-san. I'd like to invite you to tell us a little bit about your take from Japan.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my name is Kazuya Soyama. I'm from Japan. Yep. And I'd like to talk about the Japanese situation. So for gender kind of things, maybe that in Japan, still where the male are taking initiative in society. And probably you remember the incident recently. The chairperson of organizing the committee of Tokyo Olympic Games resigned due to his sexist comment. Yeah, so that atmosphere regarding the man-led society is still around, but companies, government try to change the mindset. And especially 35 years ago, the Equal Employment Opportunity Act was in effect in Japan. And since then, the female workers increased gradually. But education is very important. So the company or government do education and mindset is also changing in daily life. But like me and the elderly people have to be careful about that, because when I was young, still around me, the atmosphere is a man work outside and women keep the house. So such kind of the old mindset implanted in our mindset. So we have to be always careful, especially the Japanese male, careful about such kind of unconscious biases. So that is the current situation. And also you mentioned about inclusion or some kind of that. I work for NTT Communications, and still the NTT Communications and major workers are Japanese male. So the communication in Japanese is very good. But in these days, the foreign people are coming and they join into the NTT Communications. So sometimes we use English to communicate with them. So in the case, sometimes we have still the difficult communication with in such a communication in English. So that we have to improve more and more, even in the current situation. Yeah, that's my comment from me. Okay.
Thank you. That's really wonderful. And what I took away from that was that it's the journey to being more mindful about difference and inclusion. It's never the destination. We're never going to be perfect. We're always going to be learning. So we can't be too hard on ourselves. I'm going to ask the wonderful Jocelyn to talk to us next about her point of view about diversity and inclusion.
Thanks, Sienna. I'm lucky to grow up. So I come from Malaysia, so I'm lucky to be growing up in a country where it is very multiracial. So it's very culturally diverse, and we're kind of used to diversity. And however, like it's quite noticeable that inclusion is an issue as well, because it's hard. Sometimes people don't think about designing or coming up with things that is suitable for the general public. So there's always situation where like we kind of are not inclusive enough. But in terms of the company, so our company is very supportive of the inclusion and diversity. We do kind of try to have different range of people, not just in terms of gender, right? Different people from different background and different colors, and yeah. So I think it is important, as Sienna mentioned, and I think Matt also mentioned, in terms of coming up with product and design for people, right? If you have the other diverse people in the group who is designing the product, then you will be able to come out with a better solution. Yeah, and for myself, like I'm a lefty, right? And many years ago, there's a lot of things that are really designed only for right-handed people, and it's actually pretty frustrating. So, but I think things have improved now. So I think it's a journey that we are getting better and better on this. Thanks.
That's actually a really good example, Joyce. Thank you, Jocelyn. Sorry. Now I'm going to throw to Archie to finish off this section. Tell us, Archie, tell us what you think.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, collectively, yeah, diversity is really good. But I have another thought. It's really a matter of perspective, but that goes all the way from the start. Like what I mean, from here, early on when you were young, I mean the olden days, they have this mindset that you have to work hard, and there's no opportunity within country. You have to go abroad, something like that, to have a better life. And then in school, you are measured on a fixed set of metrics. It's like you're trained to think the same way. So even though like you go to they get people from different school, if it's the same metrics, you don't get diversity in a way, and that kind of eliminates creativity and stuff. And then eventually go to the workplace. There are standard norms that you need to follow. Like you need to start from the bottom of the food chain, something like that. And then you can't like air out what you need to say. At some point, there's really no room for creativity, and there's like you get the opportunity cut out. So it's like a cookie cutter setup. And then eventually, when you grow up, you get exposed, you meet different people, you go to conference like this, and then you start to see different points of view, like what Matt has mentioned, different angles, different perspectives, and then you get to try new things, and that gives you a bigger picture. So one thing that actually struck me was so simple. So one time we were watching a live concert. So I have my kid with me. She was still small, so I am able to see what's happening around. And then she asked me that she can see. She's just seeing a part of it. Then I carried her. Then what struck me is what she told me. Said, "Oh, so this is actually what you see when you're tall." So I mean, from that basic thing, you already can know that everybody has a different perspective because they see things in a different way, and based on that, you really can't do some assumptions or pre-assumptions and everything, and you have to consider most of it. That's basically a challenge, but being aware of the situation makes it a good thing for us if we want to make a change. That's my take.
Well said. Very well said. So I'm going to move us on to the next question. I'm going to ask all of the panelists the same thing, which is, are you affected by unconscious bias? And I suppose there's 2 points to this. Are you brave enough to admit that you have been biased against other people unconsciously, but also have you experienced it? Have you as towards yourself? So I'm going to start by asking Tugso to explain if she has been either on the giving or receiving end of unconscious bias.
I think we all have unconscious biases, and I think I had more when I first entered in ICT industry. Most of the time I found myself as an only female in the team, and maybe because of that, it seemed to me that only men can succeed in the industry. So somehow it was hard to me accept other females as my colleague. I think that was the truth at the beginning of my career. But that is, so outdated and common false assumption now. I've seen and worked with many strong, young and experienced women in the field and admire them a lot and try to learn from them. But from my observation, women or minorities oftentimes have less opportunities for professional advancement due to their personal circumstances or due to some external factors. And I mean, in other words, they have less chances to take challenges or risks that is crucial to grow professionally. I have heard that sometimes their distinction or gender is seen as the weakness or the major factor of the failure. And even more in contrast, it's been told sometimes their achievements are underrated or less appreciated professionally. Usually minorities themselves do not speak out because their feelings, they do not speak out their feelings because they are not confident that expressing their feelings could bring any positive results. So I think these things happen due to the unconscious biases we all have. So it is important to acknowledge our unconscious biases and try to avoid from the negative effect. Thank you, Sienna.
Very true, Tukso. And I think there's a really interesting point there in that unconscious bias, when you're feeling prejudiced against, it means you feel vulnerable and therefore you're much less likely to share. And it's very hard to grow professionally or personally if you're not sharing and taking risks, exactly like you said. Yama-san, may I ask you the same question?
Yep. So, okay, I would like to confess, as I mentioned, in Japan, and men have an implemented old mindsets. So I like to confess my experiences. Okay, so once upon a time, there was in a meeting of a network operators, like a NOC in a rural area, Japan. And a group of attendees, approximately 20 or more, were walking from a railway station to the venue. And I saw one female attendee carrying a very heavy bag. So I said to her, "Oh, it looks heavy. So may I carry the bag?" And a pure mind. But she refused. And how to refuse wasn't a very no, thank you kind of thing, but no, very strong. Oh, I was just a bit embarrassed, but also sorry for that. Yeah. But later, someone advised me that she might not want to be treated like a weak lady in a business field. So I learned it from it that if I think it is a good for others, it may not be appropriate action from an equality perspective, especially in a business field. So that my shame. Okay.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being humble enough to admit that. And I really commend you for that. And I think we should all look inside and see when we've done accidental things like that. Next, Jocelyn, can I invite you to tell us your answer?
Yeah, so something similar around male and female, because like it's said that our industry is still more male dominated. So like there are times in meetings, especially with like external partners or that we meet, and often they like to, if there is a male and a female in the room, they often like to kind of point and talk to the male rather than like the female or myself. Maybe they think that the male is usually someone more superior and, you know, someone with more power. But I'm fortunate that my colleagues and superior often redirect the conversation back to myself when it's something that's my responsible. So thankful for that. And of course, it is said that if you have a brain, you have a bias, right? So I have also done like some unconscious bias to someone else. In a situation where like we travel a lot, and I travel to US quite a lot as well. When I see a colleague who actually looks like me, looks like a Chinese, looks like they are from Asia, and I actually thought that, you know, they have a similar background or culture as myself, right? But when I ask something and I expect them to kind of have the same understanding, I was surprised that it's actually not the case. So it's quite embarrassed because I assume that, you know, if that person looks the same as me, they would behave like me. So that's not the case. Yeah. And one more thing is that I think I somehow there is, we are taught that, someone with tattoo is a bad person. So I had actually gave a bad comment, like telling my friend that, that person with tattoo is someone bad. And I feel very bad after that, because that's not the case, right? So yeah, thanks.
You'd be a bit worried walking around in Australia because everyone has tattoos. We are a nation of criminals, though, so I suppose that's fine. But I do like your point about the cognitive dissonance that happens when you chat to someone. You assume that they might talk back to you in Mandarin or Cantonese or something like that, and then they talk back in a completely different language, and it kind of gives you this, oh, okay. Now, Matt, I would like to ask you to share with us.
I mean, I guess as Jocelyn said, like all of us do have those biases. If we say we don't, we're just lying. I mean, from like those of you who know me better know I'm fairly outspoken. So I think an area where I definitely have my troubles there is to make sure that like everybody in the room gets their voice kind of, or everybody on the video conference, which nowadays probably actually exacerbates that problem and makes it worse, right? Where it's really like, yeah, just because somebody culturally or as Tuxa was saying, maybe not feeling confident enough or is not speaking up, doesn't mean they don't have anything to say. Like their opinions, their take on something is equally or might well be more valuable than mine, but like making a conscious effort to ensure that you actually encourage the quieter people in the room or the video conference to speak up and actually hear all sides of the story, I think is really important, and that's definitely an area I'm struggling with. To go back to maybe the kind of being on the receiving end, Toyama-san was mentioning language earlier. I think this is an area where I'm the most kind of aware of this, was like, yeah, the language in this industry tends to be English, which is a language I've spoken most of my life, even though it's not my native language. But that's something where I've been on the receiving end of it. Like years back, I've been working in a all Cantonese speaking team, right? And those are lovely people. They went out of their way to include me and make me feel welcome and so on. But still, all the professional conversations was in English, right? And that worked. But all the subtext, all the background, anything kind of going on in the office, I had no clue. And I never really felt part of that, just because of the language, despite people making an effort. So this is a really, really tough kind of area.
Matt, I just wanted to briefly pick up on something you said. And in fact, one of our participants, Bani Lara, kind of mentioned a similar thing. One kind of dimension of diversity we haven't talked about is personality. We work in an industry where there's very outgoing people, but there's also very quiet people. And Matt, you did talk about, making the space for people who are a bit quieter or have different, kind of processing. They need a lot more processing time, or they're not as extroverted. I think that's an excellent point. So I'll just read what Bani said. I know a lot of introvert male ICT people that just run away when they see a girl. We're not that scary. Come on. Actually, back me up here. What do you think?
Hey, yeah, I'm also guilty as well. So if not, I'm a liar. So let's not go to that. But there's really two sides of the coin. And I had experience on the receiving end as well. But on a funny part, so I'm gonna tell a story about that. But for the unconscious bias here in Philippines, we have this term called like a judger or judgmental, something like that. And at one time, there was this term that was coined. It's called lyogenic. So it means you look good from afar, but not when you come close. So something like that. So you're being, assessed already based on your physical appearance. I mean, so back to the other side of the coin, being on the receiving end. But it was, in a way, in a positive tale. So one time when I started, growing my hair, long. I actually wanted to grow a beard. So I was in the meeting in the office, and then there's this one guy who just asked me, "Hey, bro, what's a good brand for a guitar?" Then I said, "You're asking me for a good brand for that?" I said, "Why? You have a band, right?" Something like that. So, that went along for quite a while, and then they started asking me about drums, other musical instruments. So I kind of played along. So it was like kind of fun. And then one time I was going to a conference. So I was at the airport checking in. And then the person in the counter said, "Oh, so sir, do you have a gig this week?" At first, I wasn't, I didn't get what he mentioned. I said, "Oh yeah." Then I said, "Yes, I have a gig." "Oh, since you've been here like most of the time because your face looks familiar." And okay, so I'm now an artist, something like that. And then they gave like some special treatment. My bag was really cared properly, etc., etc. I mean, uh, receiving in a good way, what was kind of good, but the story about that is people more or less judge you already. But I mean, from my experience, it was kind of fun. And the moment you become aware of that, I think it's either you put it forward in a good way as well, or don't do something bad. So it's a domino effect. That's my take.
So we have a very insightful comment here from Dabao. Everyone knows you're an international celebrity, Achi. You're just moonlighting in the networking community. But we actually have a much more serious comment that I would like to highlight. Renee, thank you for contributing. He wrote, "I think the 4 layers of diversity is a must-have for employees and employer to work openly together." Very good point. I think it definitely is a collaboration, and it's a long-term collaboration. It's not a one training and we're all, woke. Now we're going to go on to the final question before we have thank you for sharing that link, Renee. That's awesome. We'll have a look at that. We're going to, before we have questions and discussion, this is probably the most important question of this whole session today. It's what can we do to make it better? And I think I just want to highlight that we want people leaving here today feeling like there's small things that they can do to make a big impact, and that in fact it's everyone's responsibility to just make those little changes. So I'd like to start by asking Toyama-san to tell us from his point of view what kind of the little things that we can do to improve our own and other people's unconscious bias.
Yeah, so I'm the person who have an unconscious bias, I think. So I always checking my behavior and thinking in my mind, and this action is a good or bad from such kind of diversity or point of view. Yeah, so to learn is very important, and also I'm always thinking about to respect others always, and when we are having a communication or talking with others, and respect that person, and to be polite. Yeah, so if I think such a kind of things, then the communication makes smoother. And of course, I have an unconscious bias probably. So feedback is very important. So I always checking my behavior and sometimes ask others, "Oh yeah, that is not my my action was in unconscious bias or not." Yeah. So I'm trying to do that.
Thank
always.
you. Very good points there. I'd like to ask Joss for her input here.
Thanks, Ina. Yeah, I agree with what Toyama-san said, that it's good that we now know what's unconscious bias and it exists, right? So when you know it exists, try to kind of make it something you're conscious with, try to kind of question before or think through before saying something or reacting. Although I know it's difficult, right? Because it's something that is wired in our mind for a long time. And hopefully the industry or the employers would provide unconscious bias education to all the people. And also, if I happen to treat you biasly, please let me know or voice up. Although it's very hard because when this happen, right, usually like Archie, he's stunned, right, when someone asks him something that you totally did not think people would ask you that. So, but try to kind of let the other person know it would be beneficial for both parties. Thanks.
Great answers. And I just add to that if you see other people making assumptions about another person, you can also call them out or, politely suggest they might want to rethink their bias. Before I hand over to Archie for this, I'm going to also put my 2 cents in terms of things that we can do to combat combat unconscious bias in ourselves and other people. One thing I find really powerful is to ask people their stories. When people share their stories and feel listened to, and you actually listen to them, and you find out so much more about them, you can see the whole person, and it kind of explodes the unconscious bias that you may not realize you have. It's also great because you get to know different people and everyone has an interesting story. And the other thing I'd like to say is that one thing I thought was really cool as part of the Obama administration, there was a higher number of women who worked in the administration than ever before in the White House. And yet they still said that at the beginning, many of the executives struggled to be heard in the rooms full of powerful men. So the women got together and decided to work on an amplification strategy, which was where in meetings, if someone who wasn't kind of the typical power clique, if they said something that was really helpful, then someone else, one of this group, the out group, would chime up and say, "Hey, Joss, that was a great statement. I think it's really cool." And by doing that over and over again, it amplified the voices of the people whose voices were a little bit quieter. So I'd encourage, in fact, challenge you guys all, particularly the attendees, to listen in meetings and hear if someone who has a slightly smaller voice, metaphorically, says something you really agree with, pipe up and show your support by telling them that was a really great idea. Over to you, Archie.
Yeah, thanks, Shanna. That was good. Yeah, so it's really from my end, I think it's awareness, as mentioned earlier, as well as acceptance. So it starts with you, obviously, and then you share that. You walk the talk, be a good example. And then if you need to speak your mind, there's always a polite or proper way of communicating. Sometimes it helps. Matt is smiling, so that's not you. So we're all good. And then, if we know this, we accept this, and those who are capable of doing that have the power and, I think, responsibility to make it better. I think so.
Good point. With power comes great responsibility. Tugso, can I throw to you, please?
Yes, and as you say, diversity awareness trainings and policies are very important. They can have significant impacts on organization, culture, and environment. And also, to add more, mentoring-related activities or mentorship programs coordinated by global or regional entities will be very helpful for nurturing the talents from the different groups. And we all know that Apricot and Ethnic have fellowship programs that gives opportunities to participants from diverse geographic areas. Similarly, maybe mentorship programs can be started. And to add more, facilitations and support services at workplaces could be simple but very effective way of keeping talents and increasing their productivity in the organization and in industry. For example, child caring service or crèche is a practical way of supporting parents with young kids. With this kind of services provided, women for example, come back from maternity leave in shorter time. That's always a huge problem, actually. Thank you.
Very, very good points. Now, Matt, I'm going to ask you to wrap up, but I will just say we've got 3 really great questions from the audience. So not to minimize your voice, but can you be quite brief?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I think there's 2 factors. I mean, from the personal level, I think all of us have said that in some way, shape, or form. Be aware, right? Like, kind of be conscious of your bias. Think before you kind of reply. Assume good intent when somebody says something, and yeah, like try to be an ally, right? Like, kind of the amplification stuff you mentioned, I think goes right in that direction. Like, encourage the quieter voice in the room to make their contribution. Kind of elicit an answer, kind of or a contribution if you can. And I think that also goes to the stuff mentioned earlier from Jocelyn about like calling somebody out. It's very, very hard, if not near impossible, to call the person out directly. But if you witness that, if you're part of that, you can really contribute by calling out wrong behavior to the person instead of relying on the person that's the victim in that situation to do so, because that is really hard. If you look at a more like kind of bigger picture industry-wide thing, I think something Archie mentioned briefly earlier and Tuxa as well, is like kind of this has to start really, really early, right? This is not just mentorship and internships. Those are really, really important, but I think this has to start at a much, much earlier age to like make people aware that kind of a job in tech is not only for people that look like me, basically, in very simple terms, right? Like, kind of get girls in school like interested in this kind of subject. Make it clear that it's okay. This is not some kind of role that's only for specific people, right? Like, make it at a very early stage. Kind of introduce that any kind of like underrepresented group kind of is really encouraged and can go in that direction, has this opportunity. I think this is a really like important thing, and that's a long-term kind of strategy.
Totally agree.
That was
Matt.
brief enough.
Oh yeah, it was awesome. What I heard from that as well was that when you have any type of privilege, it's your responsibility to use it to call out or be an ally and an advocate for people who don't have as much power in that position. That's a very strong position to have. And it's something that I think not only pays benefits for the people who you're supporting, but also for you as a human. I think it's a really good thing to do. All right, I'm going to throw it to the first question. In the current culture, diversity environment in the Asia Pacific, for example, working in the ICT industry, do you think employees still look at gender or race, choosing the right candidate for the job? I'm going to open that to all of the panelists. Would someone like to take that question?
Well, again, I think this is about conscious and unconscious. I think most employers by now know to not consciously do this, but there is certainly a level of it being unconsciously done. Like, those are people, right? Like, this is not the company doing this. This is the person in HR that looks at an application or whatever it is. And yeah, it is really, really important for companies to have the kind of programs in place and the training in place and so on to actively make an effort to avoid this. Because again, unconscious bias is there. That will never be going away. You can fight it by being aware of it and actively trying to prevent it, and I think having this kind of like active programs to ensure this doesn't happen or happens less is really crucial.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's a good point. Sometimes there are single points of failure within the organization, like HR or whatever, and they need to be ultra robust to ensure that and mindful that they're not falling into these traps. I'm just going to push on with the last question and open up to all panelists before we close for today. What are your views of ageism being the old new, challenging unconscious bias faced by the ICT industry? So who's the youngest person on the panel? Because I'm going to make them answer that question.
So I'm out then.
No, I think
So yeah, I am the oldest guys probably. So I I like to view my about this question. So I think in Asian cultures, the elders should be respected in a historically. Yeah, that is an good education for a long time. But these days, especially internet spread all over the world, the why elderly guys respected was their experiences, knowledges, that such kind of things are much more than the younger guys. But in these days, internet breaks that. I mean that the younger guys can have enough knowledge or experiences using the internet. There are a lot of information around us. So older people like me should not stay on such kind of old culture, but we are thinking and considering to learn to beaten by the youngest. Yeah. Yeah, so I like the same as in the youngest. So that's an attitude is necessary for the older guys. But basically, let's if the older or younger, we respect others. That is a very important things to living in the world, not only in the tech world, but in all over the world. So so old and tech ageism will be disappear, but yeah, we should do have kind of an attitude for a long time. Yeah.
I think a really beautiful word you said there was respect, and I think that lending people or giving people your respect is kind of the antidote to a lot of the issues we're talking about today. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to hand over to Mara in a second, but I'd just like to say thank you so much to everyone. I've had a blast, even though the technical difficulties and my seat occasionally going down like this. It's a shame we can't talk all day, but let's keep the conversation going. Please do go to the APNIC community statistics page, demographics page, and there's also the women APAC Women in Tech mailing list that Badrika will put the link to, where we can have more of these discussions, which I would really like to keep that going. So thank you, and over to you, Mara.
Thank you, Sienna. This was a great discussion. So this is now the end of our Q&A session. If your question hasn't been answered, please send it to conference@apnic.net and we will forward it to the speakers. Before I let you all go for a break, I'm asking you to do a quick poll that should pop out on your screen. Once again, I want to remind everybody that the session recording and slides will be available on the conference program page. After the break, we still have 3 more sessions to do, so please don't forget to come back after the break is over. If you're posting about the event, please do not forget to add the hashtag Apricot 2021 as well. Thank you, everybody, for attending the panel, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
The guitar solo.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey, the panelists don't leave yet. You know what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are you ready? Okay. I'm gonna do a count. I think Philip, do you want to join the group photo? There you go.
Come, Philip.
Hey.
Come on.
And other APNICs that we like. Go on. We're gonna do 100 shots if that's okay.
I'm sure, at least.
Yeah. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Hold on. Just saving it. For backup and redundancy.
Important.
All of you should be aware of that. 1, 2. Okay, we're good.
Awesome.
Thanks
Thank you
again.
so
I'll
much.
share this with you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
See you later.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Bye.
Bye.